Mikel, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Mikel Delagrange, and I am the head cheerleader of Team Amani.
Okay, Mikel, first of all, can you give us a bit of background about yourself?
About myself.
About yourself.
Well, I'm an international criminal lawyer as a day job, and then I moonlight as a head cheerleader of Team Amani. I've been working, in East Africa for, maybe 16 years. Mostly at the International Criminal Court, then I also worked for the United Nations, and now I work for a civil society organization focused on justice for Sudan.
So how does an international criminal lawyer get mixed up in African cycling?
You know, it's strange because I think now the streams are really coming together, and in many ways I see it as a similar fight. There are forces that be in this world that have consigned certain regions to obscurity. And in that obscurity, they tinker and they play and they meddle. And it leaves people in a sort of stasis where, they can't, despite all their talent and despite all the promise, they can't claw out without, I think, a little bit of help from the outside, from those of us who think and see all the promise, all the potential, and also those of us who find the reasons in which they find themselves in that position to be unjust in the first instance. And I see that, the similarities in terms of the ongoing conflicts that are happening in the region, but also in the state of sport.
And so what was the genesis of this? I mean, I guess there must have been a genesis in the sense, what made you want to do something and why did you choose cycling?
I never wanted this, I have to be honest, because I think the global south is a place where, good intentions go to die. And yeah, it's usually, these things are run by a lot of hubris, typically on the person who's initiating it, some kind of vanity project, and with little regard for what's actually happening on the ground. That's my analysis of charities and development in general in the global south. With respect to cycling, there were athletes. I was living in Kenya, I was working in Kenya, I was working in the region, and I came to know these athletes as friends. And you only have to hear the story about the plateau. Every athlete, no matter how promising, hits the same wall so many times, and then you're just like, well, that sounds like bullshit, and the ambitions in the very beginning were tiny, because the last thing I wanted, as I said, was to create like another project in Africa, especially being from outside of Africa. But I thought, we could apply some of the lessons that I had learned, the dark underbelly of international development, and try and do things differently. To have the stakeholders be the ones in the driver's seat and people like me in the back. And that's what we agreed to do from the very beginning with my partner, Sule Kangangi. It was his dream, it was his vision, and I just was the one who, had conversations with people in the industry to get his vision and dream out there. And since then, we just, I think, got a little bit of momentum. Some of it was serendipitous, because of the moment in time and because of where gravel was at the moment. And some of it was, I think, a testament to the fact that there is something to the dream. And it's not just, in our view, an East African dream. There is a fundamental flaw with this sport. And I think anybody who comes from outside of Europe can see it pretty clearly. Like, to compete at the highest levels, you have to be in Europe. And almost certainly you have to be European, because if you look at the statistics, they don't lie. Like, out of 130 years of running the World Championships, there's been like 2 or 3 outside of Europe who've won it. That's just one race, but just as an example. So, like, what are we really talking? Is it a world championship or is it a regional championship? And then we're not just talking about the athletes, but the location. And if those two things combine, then you really have pretty high walls. And I think those of us who come from outside of Europe but love the sport and love all of its beautiful traditions think that there are still more stories to tell. There are more actors to get on stage. And that's all very exciting, And I think even from a corporate perspective, you would think that the cycling industry itself would be wanting to, open up to new markets so that, more people are riding bikes.
I think it's really interesting coming from outside Africa, is when I went to the migration race in Kenya that you guys organise with Rob Gatilis, the founder of Factor. I think it really hits home just kind of how important this is, but also you say dream, but when you're there you think, oh my God, this is an impossible dream to a certain degree, kind of without the Amani Project. So where do these guys even look? I mean, when you look at everything, it's so humbling, and then you just leave it with so much kind of awe at the guys who are kind of trying to get out of there. But I think, as you say, at the corporate level, and corporate, as we were saying, kind of from Factor, there's something about it that gives you so much, how would I put it, gives lifeblood to what you're doing, because it's something so much bigger and more important. But then you kind of have so much respect for you and everyone that's doing this, because those walls are so high. And how are you doing it? Are you just chipping away at the walls?
Well, let me start by saying the respect is mutual, because Rob didn't have to do this. There would have been people whispering in his ear that there are more important markets to exploit, and stories that will relate better to the sale of bikes, and he did it anyway. And I think in a market that's saturated with choice, you give clients and consumers the opportunity to then also, express themselves and their values by buying a bike. The same way Patagonia did it. And that's a story I think we need to get out there a bit better, because it really is. This project doesn't happen without Factor. It doesn't happen without Rapha or Park or SRAM or Physique or Wahoo. So, kudos to those who, within these corporations had the gumption to bet on a long shot. But, the thing for us, to get to your question, it's about fails. Like, ultimately, we can boil it down. For those who don't have the bandwidth to listen to the complexity of it, it's about maximizing the number of fails our athletes get versus the Belgian kid. The Belgian kid gets 100 fails, a season. And at our best, with all these resources, we maybe get 25, And a perfect anecdote is the Tour of Rwanda. So the Tour of Rwanda acts as kind of like the World Series for Africa, in terms of the best cyclists will come there and try and showcase their talent. They go against UAE, they go against Israel Premier Tech, they go against, Direct Energy. And they get results because they're racing at home. There's also these little subtle, things that change when you're racing in an environment that's familiar to you. Europeans take it for granted because they mostly race in Europe. So you have all of these African kids from Rwanda, Eritrea, Ethiopia, who go out and get results. The week after, they go home and they sit on their hands. And already, Israel Premier Tech and UAE, they're on to the next race. These guys may not have another race until their national championships, and then the world championships. We're talking 3 races. You can't compete, especially with a sport like cycling, where it's all about training against the best, losing against the best until you become the best. So we've got lots of ideas about how to, increase our number of fails, and it's not for no reason that we took on gravel. Gravel, because it operates still outside of full UCI control, we can line up against the best in the world and nobody stops us. We don't have to accumulate, and spend millions of dollars on points and nonsensical races all over Europe to be able to line up at the start line. And it just, because you also have this different environment where people are more welcoming in general. We have a lot of people who bent over backwards to make it accessible for us.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. But now we're also, pivoting to the road, because there are so many athletes from the continent who want to join us but don't want to give up on the road dream. So we're trying to find this kind of hybrid, like Vanderpool model, where we can be and hone athletes from the very beginning in our development project in Iten, to be able to ride competitively on the mountain bike, ride competitively in gravel, and then also on the road.
Tell us about the Iten home.
Yeah, that was Sule's dream. And we basically are trying to mainline into this swagger that comes with perennial champions, and in Iten, it's just a small village at the top of the Rift Valley, 2,400 meters, but there's something in the water there, and they just keep producing, the best in the world in terms of running. And it wasn't always the case, which is what I'm so interested in. It wasn't so long ago that people were also saying that these guys didn't belong.
Yeah.
And now they dominate the sport. When a Kenyan rocks up, or from Iten, to the London Marathon, people are thinking about second and third. And we want that to be the same in cycling. I know it sounds outrageous, but it would have sounded outrageous even 50 years ago in running. But the thing is that these kids, so to get more to something more poignant, these kids are hearing all day, every day, that they don't belong. They're hearing, whether explicitly or implicitly, that they're not good enough. And I want them to be in an environment where excellence is the norm. Even if just by proxy, they can just start to feel like, actually, we can take on the mob.
The project kind of seems to have probably escalated far much more than you'd have expected at the beginning. And going back to what you were saying about this was never a kind of a mission for you when it began. It was something that you wanted to do. I mean, I know from being in team environments, and I see what you do with the Amani Project, the amount of responsibility that lies on me, and how you're constantly having to pitch this project to everybody. And that's just the tip of the iceberg we're seeing. We're not seeing the kind of below the water, huge stuff you're having to deal with African politics, with international cycling politics, with just general politics. What are the things that keep you going? I mean, how do you keep finding that motivation?
I was reflecting on this today, and again, drawing analogies from my day job, because it does feel like sometimes it's a Sisyphean effort. But sticking on the stone metaphor, I've been thinking about like the third Newtonian law of physics, and how to move, you must be stronger than an equal and opposite force pushing against you. And then now to take it to like the political space, thinking about dialectics, how there's always, a kind of positive force and a negative force of equal strength up against you. And those political movements, those coalitions that actually change things, are just a little bit stronger than that opposing force. And I feel like that's a challenge worth getting up for, I've been trying to, because sometimes we get a little bit, disillusioned by how petty people can be in this space. Especially, when I think about what I'm doing in my day job, when I see people doing that in the sporting realm, I'm just like, why? But when you think about it as a natural force, that there must be natural opposition, just like there is gravity. then I think it's easier for us to kind of to deal with, because otherwise, like what we're trying to do won't achieve anything unless, there is a countervailing force pushing against us. So yeah, I think the motivation is also, with these kids, I can see that all they need is time. It's obvious. The kids that we have at home on the pump track, we're getting exposed to the bikes for the first time, and then within 2 weeks they're just mashing it. You're just like, wow, I give this guy like a cheap 50 or rather say $500 giant entry-level bike, and the guy is doing things that you would see on TV with the pro BMX people. So, and when you offer opportunities and people grab them, there's nothing more motivating. It's intrinsically in our nature. If you do that and you see no response, then obviously the feeling is, why am I doing this? But I've never had that here. The more opportunities that we manage to get from our partners, the people who buy into this project, the more I see a response from the guys on the ground. And we're still, there's still some countries that I'm very eager to engage with, like Eritrea. It's like a gold mine of cycling athletes there. But we have to make the case. We have to make the case that we're sufficiently serious, that our goals are, lofty enough to entice the best on the continent. But when we do that, I think our ability to go out and compete at the highest levels would be fast-tracked.
Like, God forbid we had a fast-forward button, but if we were to push it and go 10 years from now, what would you love to see?
I would love to just flip on the TV, Eurosports or ITV or whatever it may be, and then just see a lot of faces that aren't European in a peloton. That's it. I think if I could just do that for just 5 seconds, 10 years from now, that's the only little window of insight I would like to see, then it would all be worth it, right? Because then we have achieved, not just us, but it's a coalition, and I don't want anyone to be confused here. We can't do this alone. But we can get something moving, We can start to defeat gravity a little, get the ball rolling so that becomes commonplace and the norm. And if it's mainstreamed and cycling is truly international, God, we don't even know what the expression of cycling will be, right? We're focused on Pogacar at the moment, and rightfully so. But is this the pinnacle of human achievement? How can we say that when only one region is playing? So, and what about all the other stories? And I'm not just talking about in Liège-Bastogne-Liège, but is there a Liège-Bastogne-Liège to be had in Africa or in Asia or in South America? I think so, with beautiful stories and traditions to build, and new protagonists. So that's, if you could just show me a glimpse of that quickly, I would love to see it.
Well, Mikel, I think what you've accomplished now is already phenomenal. But yeah, I kind of 10 years from now, I hope I see that as well.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.